You're listening to the Mike on the Right podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to the Mike on the Right program. It feels great to be back behind the microphone this week. This is episode 19, September 8th, 2025. I am your host, Mike Neal, and I am, as always, broadcasting from the heart of the heartland, Central Indiana, the great Hoosier State, the crossroads of America. It is so wonderful to be back with you. Please like, share, subscribe, 5-star ratings, anything that you can continue to do to show your support and to get this show out. We had a nearly 14% jump in listenership from July to August. We're finally seeing the growth. It's a little bit, but it's growth in the show, and it's because of each and every one of you. So thank you so very much for listening and for your support. A lot is going on. If you listened to last week's episode, I was obviously out on vacation, so it was a pre-recorded show. We talked about the issues in America with mental health and gun violence and how those work hand in hand, and how we have to do something. We have to continue to have conversations in America that lead us to protecting our constitutional right, but also protecting our children. Those things are not mutually exclusive. And today we're going to get into another portion of that topic that we didn't get to dive into nearly as much on the mental health side, which is the degradation of mental health in America. Where did that all start? And so that's going to be part of our program today. And I'll get through the three items we're going to talk about. There's so much going on right now. You're probably hearing a lot about, things going on with National Guard troops potentially being deployed to other cities outside Washington, D.C. You've probably heard about the Haitian migrants in Indiana and the controversy around that. You're hearing a lot of things about vaccines and the rollbacks of potential vaccination rules and laws and mandates in America. There's a lot. And I'm with you. There's a lot. It's overwhelming at times. But, I was in church this morning, and I always record this on Sunday for your Monday listening pleasure as you're driving to work or working through your day, or, of course, through the week. And church today really struck home about continuing to put our trust and our hope in the Lord. And that seems like a cliche phrase. Well, everything just get better if you trust the Lord. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get better. But when our hearts are set on things above, when we set our hearts on those things, that doesn't mean that we don't engage in culture. That doesn't mean we don't speak the truth in politics and government and whatever else it is. But we have to look there first. He is our source of strength. He is our source of joy. He is our source of grace and stability and any of those number of things. And so as we talk today, please leave that at the top of your mind as we talk about the issues of the day. Whether you support them, whether you don't support them, whether it brings you anxiety, whether it brings you joy, remember that God is always in control. He's going to be in control with whatever comes out this week on vaccine mandates. He's in control whatever happens in cities across America. And that's how we stand firm for what we believe in, when Jesus is the center. And so I want to start off with just a message of faith. Some of these topics are going to be just general debate, but this first one is still supercharged because of what happened in Minneapolis. But let's talk about the three things we're going to talk about today, and then we'll get right to the point. We're going to talk about the dismantling of healthcare in America, how we got to where we are today from a structural standpoint, from a legal, lawful funding standpoint. Where did it start? Why are we here? And what can we do? Then we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve talking about steady interest rate cuts coming up. What does that mean for you and your pocketbook? How did we get there? It's an economic piece. It's a piece about jobs. And we've talked about it before, but there's some new developments and some things are going to start really moving. And then we're going to go to a topic in Indiana. So those of you that aren't listening from Indiana, I apologize, but you would be interested to know what's going on. there was a hearing about, it was mandated by a law passed here in Indiana just this last legislative session that required the Secretary of State to start looking and studying ways to increase voter turnout and decrease cost, and whether certain changes would be beneficial or not. We're going to talk about those. But we're going to start with the topic that kind of transcends from last week, but it's more of a nuts and bolts. How did we get here? What's the history of this? You hear about this all the time. Republicans defunded mental health in America. Democrats defunded mental health care in America. What's the truth? Who was where? We're going to talk about that. The dismantling of mental health care in America. America has a mental health crisis. That is clear. That is undeniable, and that is fact. And this is not an issue that appeared overnight. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats, over multiple decades and even, dare I say, generations, the last two for sure. When I say last two, the millennials, Gen X, we have abdicated our responsibility in mental health in America. And what's the result? Jails, emergency rooms, city streets have become de facto mental health systems, or even not systems, places where they bubble up. Let's walk through how we got here. And then let's talk about how we can fix it with real accountability, better funding safeguards, and a return to limited institutionalization where it's necessary. So this whole thing started in 1963, under then-President John F. Kennedy, who signed the Community Mental Health Act. And his goal in this law, which of course was passed by the House and the Senate, was to close the massive state hospitals that were often inhumane. We institutionalized health in America was done incorrectly for decades. And it led to an overcourse correction in the system. And instead, the idea was to build, with this law, local community mental health centers, something that's closer to home, something that's closer to families, something that's close to what folks who are dealing with mental health crises recognize, being in their own communities, their own counties, even their own states. It was a humane and forward-thinking idea at the time. But what was the problem? Congress never fully funded the program. So hospitals started shutting down, but the community-based care never arrived in sufficient numbers, enough to make a difference. Let's fast forward to the 1970s, and this deals with some court issues and some civil rights issues. Cases like Wyatt v. Stickney in 1971 gave a patient's right to treatment and against indefinite confinement. Some good pro-liberty things and ideas. But again, pieces of this did not really line up, and because of the breakdown that started in 1963 on institutionalized care for those who needed it, we really didn't think all these things through as what that would mean, and then without things being funded, we kind of started descending off this hill. This means that states couldn't keep patients warehoused without care. They couldn't force them into staying. And in theory, this was good, right? In practice, it forced states to release patients when treatment wasn't available. But that didn't mean that they didn't need treatment. We didn't do anything. It's just like, okay, well, we can't hold them. Again, that's a pro-liberty position, being held against your will for something in which you did not break the law, right? But then with these underfunded community centers, thousands of people who were released from the system had nowhere to go, and so it manifested itself in society. And then in 1980, President Jimmy Carter, while he was running for re-election as President of the United States, the Congress passed and he signed the Mental Health Systems Act. And this was his, at the time, honest attempt to deal with the long overdue funding mechanism that was missed in Kennedy's bill in 1963. And what it was going to do is it was going to mandate that community centers finally had a chance to be built. But Carter lost re-election, And the program never got a chance to take hold. Now, again, like it, don't like it, this is just the facts. I'll tell you what I think here in a second. So let's move to President Reagan, one of the greatest presidents to ever grace the earth. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan and Congress passed the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. It was President Reagan's attempt to rein in federal spending across the whole. It wasn't necessarily aimed at one area or the other. And in practice, when it came to the mental health issue, it repealed much of Carter's law and turned the direct federal funding that was going to these hospitals, or was supposed to go to these hospitals, instead it turned them into state block grants, which sounded good on paper, which gave more states control and less bureaucracy, which I'm for, and which I still believe should happen today. But in practice, the funding did drop about 25%. And then states, because they were under pressure financially, redirected the money elsewhere within whatever the confines of the law said. And then the accountability disappeared, and many community programs were closed or never opened in this particular circumstance. I believe Ronald Reagan did wonders for the country, but this is one of the areas that missed the mark. Did Reagan create this crisis? No, this crisis started long before with these laws and then Congress not funding them, and then not being right accountability and not having things properly written. This was created by both parties. And I'm going to get kind of into what's happened in the 90s next. But you can see Congress Democrats were in control of Congress for a long time. But we've had Democratic and Republican presidents, and they all had different ideas between the legislature and the executive. And while we were fighting over the issue, it slid off, and we had a whole generation of folks that didn't get the care that they needed because we didn't understand how important it was to society and to the individual that this process be locked up and solid. So by the 1990s, we get past the Reagan era, the U.S. had closed over 80% of its psychiatric hospital beds. Community centers were insufficient, and federal oversight was weak. Democrats and Republicans alike failed to rebuild the system. And the bipartisan legacy here is homelessness exploding in major cities, county jails becoming larger mental health facilities in America, families bearing impossible burdens with little support and little knowledge and know-how. I am not a mental health expert. I'm not a doctor. You're not. Okay, maybe if you're listening, maybe you are a doctor, and you're really great if you are. But most of us are not equipped to handle what some of our neighbors and friends and family around us are going through. And we missed the mark, which is what we're paying for today. This isn't a one-man problem, a one-party problem, this is a collective miss in America. Kennedy's vision, while laudable, was underfunded. Carter's plan was too little too late. Reagan's shifts, while maybe the money was enough, I don't know if the money was enough or not, but there weren't enough guardrails to ensure that this money is for this program. You have to do this, or you don't get the money. And Congress after Congress refused to prioritize funding or oversight. And bottom line, both parties abdicated their responsibilities, and Americans have paid the price. And I believe this is one of the many reasons, this is probably one of the biggest reasons, if it is not the biggest reason, one of the biggest, why we have the gun crime we have in America today. Because yes, we have a right to defend ourselves under the Second Amendment, but we don't have a right to go and shoot up a Catholic school with kids or any group or institution because we don't like it or whatever. But mental health this abdication has led to consequences across the whole. That's just one example. That's the one I'm deriving this from because of last week's episode. Don't take that as, that's the only reason, or, there's not other causes. But mental health has got to be the biggest. And we are paying the price for that. So where do we go from here? What are some of the solutions we need to look at? We need to fix the block grant system. I'm 100% agreeable. I believe states should operate this. But there has to be guardrails. It has to require that the federal money has to be spent on mental health. Not administration, not whatever. Building, running, paying for mental health facilities in partnership with private organizations that can do the same. We need to tie the federal support to outcomes, treatment beds, crisis units, number of patients served. And if it's not working, we need to reorganize. And then there has to be buy-in from states. Add a maintenance of effort requirement so that states don't just cut their own spending and use federal dollars. They got to match it in some way, whatever that match looks like. We need to strengthen community mental health centers. We need to fund outpatient care for ongoing treatment. Again, whether that's money from the government, whether that's also money from the private sector, and meld that together. We need to support crisis centers and work alongside law enforcement, and we need to expand telepsychiatry for rural areas. Or anywhere, but for areas where it's not necessarily doable to build a private hospital in the middle of a county in western Nebraska or something. Let's have electronic access to this, and then can still get people to where they need to go, but at least having conversations and checking up on people. We need to reintroduce, limited institutionalization for extreme cases. This is going to be controversial. For the most severe cases, when someone is in danger, when they are a danger to themselves or others, we need to bring back the option of institutionalized care, and there needs to be safeguards. I believe admissions should require court approval with the recommendation of a healthcare professional. Maybe there should even be a second opinion. We need placement must undergo continual review so that it's not permanent. Is it every 6 months? Is it every year? What does that look like? I don't know. And if improvement is shown, then of course release into community care. And if not, treatment continues until it's safe. And then there needs to be people who just like with children and guardian ad litems, there needs to be somebody who advocates for these folks, maybe beyond family or spouses or friends, to ensure we don't do this wrong, to check up on them, to make sure the care is useful and necessary, and that we're not abusing it like it was done in the decades past. We have to strike a balance. So my closing thought on this is America's mental health crisis is not just a policy failure, it is a moral one. We cannot continue to let politics and budgets dictate whether people in crisis get help or end up in jail cells or homeless encampments. We have to solve the crux and the core of the problem, not just sweep homeless people off the streets, not just whatever. We Second Amendment rules, and we don't have to deal with the personal responsibility. This is personal responsibility. Mental health care is a personal responsibility act. We have to do it. Both parties caused this mess, and both parties should be the solution. But those that I'm closest with in the Republican Party should absolutely pick up this mantle. This is a mantle morally and politically we should be doing. That means that guardrails on funding, revitalizing community centers, and yes, reintroducing limited institutionalization with court oversight is required. It's time for leaders to stop abdicating their responsibilities and finally build a system that treats mental illness with the seriousness it deserves. Let's move on to a little bit lighter topic, and that is, over the past few years, you've been hearing a lot about high interest rates and who controls and causes that. And the federal government, we've talked about this before, the Federal Reserve created this system that essentially helps guide the economy to not grow too fast, to not grow too slow, and to control the cost of borrowing. And in 2022 and 2023, the Federal Reserve went on its most aggressive hiking campaign since the 1980s, which pushed borrowing costs up in order to tame inflation, to kind of slow the growth and the cost of items. But that also meant that mortgage rates have shot up. I'm sure some of you know, 6, 7, sometimes even 8%. Credit card balances became more expensive. Anyone looking to finance or refinance a car or home improvement felt the squeeze. And we're seeing this today. And I do not disagree related to federal interest rates that for those couple of years we needed to kind of tighten our monetary policy. But I believe, as I said in a previous episode, that we have held on to this too long. We've kept this policy going too long. Jerome Powell and fighting Donald Trump, even though I'm not saying that Donald Trump should be meddling, but Donald Trump has been right about this. Economists are right about this in certain segments. The reason we're seeing that's not joblessness yet. That's all kind of held. But the reason why job growth is stagnating isn't because of the economy, because the GDP is growing, consumer spending is up, consumer confidence is up. But what's the last piece when all of those are still operating? We're right on the precipice. We're right on this curve of losing a bunch of jobs, which increases unemployment, which then people get spooked and they stop spending money, and it's a whole spiral. It's the Fed's policy that has been held on too long. And they just got bit in the butt by seeing this last jobs report being only 22,000 jobs created, well below expectations. And the Fed's like, oh, yep, guess it's time to change our monetary policy, and we might need to do so much faster than we thought. Well, golly gee, we've only been saying that for about 6 months, maybe longer. The Fed needs to cut interest rates. And I'll tell you why and how this affects you. When the federal funds rate is high, that means that more interest is required to get loans, right? And so now mortgages are not necessarily tied to that directly, but they can follow that trend, and you can see trend lines. But for businesses, right? Businesses want to hire and they want to expand and they want to grow. The GDP is moving. We're moving forward, but it's too expensive to borrow. And so they're not growing. And so at some point, that's a tipping point where if we don't do something to allow businesses to grow, people are going to start getting spooked, and it's just going to snowball into something that we don't want, and it's going to hurt our pocketbook. But also for those of you, and I don't think you should, but if you do, I'm not judging you, but if you do, I've been there before. If you have credit card debt, your credit card debt gets more expensive when this rate is higher. There's a number of things, and we need to kind of push back on this, and so I think it's time for the Fed to cut interest rates. And what are they saying today? They're saying that they may cut, there's 3 meetings left. There's one coming up here, I think it's next week. There's one coming up here where they can cut the interest rate by 0.25, 25 basis points, or even the 50 basis points would be great, but everyone's kind of aiming on 25, but then they have 3 meetings left. So September, October, and I think December. I think they skipped November. There's talk that they're going to cut on all 3 of those. Well, we could really start seeing some momentum here with the economy. I think the economy has gone as far as it can go. President Trump's policies have gone as far as he can go. And you can't tell me it's tariffs. You can't tell me these other things, because the economy is continuing to grow. People are continuing to spend. It's jobs that have puttered out. And it's because borrowing is expensive. It is clear. And anyone that tells you otherwise is disingenuous. And so it's time for the Federal Reserve to make these cuts, because it will help everyone. And it will unbridle the economy. It's the last shackle to America's golden age, as President Trump puts it. Again, you don't have to agree with him. You don't have to like him. I'm not here to sell whatever it is Donald Trump is saying today or this week. But I can tell you that the data is clear that it is the federal interest rate that is bridling the last piece of this economy. And so what does this mean for you? This means that let's say if you're a small business owner, you can expand your business. Large business owners can expand their business. Large corporations can expand their business. It's good for jobs. This trend can also lower interest rates for your mortgages. Now, again, not directly tied. You can start to refinance. Maybe you need to get a bigger home. Maybe you need to build, whatever that looks like. If you do have credit card debt or other types of debt, your interest rate can come down. And so it's a great time that we've been stuck, right? Some people bought homes several years ago because a lot of realtors say, oh, you should buy. And I love my realtor friends, but I think you didn't know enough. And now people have been stuck in high interest rates because you thought they were going to cut a lot earlier and it didn't happen. And that's not your fault. That's the Fed's fault. But now's the time where some of these folks can get this refinance relief, and some people have been holding on to homes or property or what have you, and they need to trade or buy or whatever they need to do can do that. We also have to watch inflation. And so the Fed is going to have to really not slow roll this. They need to do it. They need to do it in a measured way and intentional. But I think they need to cut quite a bit here in the next 6, 9, 12 months. And so I wanted to cover that really quick. What is that? I wanted you to know what that meant for you. And I'm running out of time, and I've got one more topic. I spent a lot of time on the mental health topic because it is very important to me. But I do want to cover quickly the last item that we talked about, and it's about elections in Indiana and something that could be happening soon in America. Indiana is currently debating whether we should take our local elections, so the ones that elect your mayors, city councils, clerk treasurers, whatever, town councils, what have you, onto the same ballots as, this is one of the items that they're talking about, on the same ballots as presidential or congressional races. And on paper, that promises more voters. But in practice, I think it risks drowning out potholes, policing, water rates, zoning, budgets, local races that are less about political party and more about being a good neighbor and owning and running your community. Because party moniker can mean less in local elections. Though I'm a Republican, I support Republicans. I don't think we can afford to do this. But what's been going on? And so there was a House Enrolled Act 1633 in this last General Assembly 2025 that ordered the Secretary of State to study a number of things. But one of those items is moving municipal elections to the even-numbered years. Right now in Indiana, we have 3 of every 4 years in a cycle has an election. Presidential, which has congressional, has governor, U.S. Senate, what have you. And then in so that was like the 2024. Then 2025 has no election right now, right? So this is the break year. And then 2026, next year, would be congressional. There's not a U.S. Senate race, but statewide offices, things like that. And then in 2027 will be municipal, and then we'll be back in 2028 to a presidential election. So this idea is to, hey, we have low voter turnout in Indiana for whatever reasons. It's even lower in municipal years. We can save money and get more voters engaged in their community if we put these municipal elections in with the same as presidential and gubernatorial and congressional. And maybe that's true, but it's going to cause 2 things in my mind. One, it's going to cause local issues to be drowned out because it's going to be superseded by presidential, congressional politics, gubernatorial, maybe even state legislature items. And you're going to hear less about the local needs and infrastructure, whether it's water and sewer and potholes and community centers and pools and the things that really actually affect your daily life, right? Remember, the federal government doesn't affect your daily life 99% of the time. And then next is state, and it doesn't really affect your life every single day, certainly more than federal. You know what does? The everyday politics and governing that happens in your city, town, and county. Township, wherever you live. And so why wouldn't you want to hear more of that? Now, I agree that the abysmal turnout in municipal elections is tough, but I would certainly rather have the ability to cut through the noise than to try to stuff it somewhere just so we can have more people voting on it. I want more people to vote on it, but I'd rather them vote in a year when we are 100% locked down on local issues. Secondly, it will make it more expensive for municipal local candidates to get their message out because now you have to go to a swath of larger voters and you're competing for airtime and radio and mail and what have you. It's just not good. I really don't think we should be doing this. Now, the Secretary of State is doing his job. Diego Morales is doing his job as the General Assembly has mandated, and he's going out and he's having community conversations and he's gathering feedback, and there are people on both sides who are saying yes, no, maybe so. They're also talking a lot about vote centers, and which essentially means you can, let's use Hamilton County where I live, for example. If I'm working in Cicero, but I live in Westfield, I can vote in Cicero's location, and they're going to have my ballot there for me, so I can vote anywhere in the county. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think that's a separate issue. But I don't think that municipal elections need to be folded in with other elections. I think we need to be able to focus on local issues. Let the other years be for the pomp and circumstance of the presidential, gubernatorial, U.S. Senate, congressional, statewide office holders, whatever. Referendums, constitutional changes, school referendums. Don't let our municipal elections get bogged down by national issues that have nothing to do with the daily life of Americans. Hoosiers, people in from Blackford County to Jay County to Clark County to Gibson County to Lake County to Elkhart County to Marion County, from Evansville to Jeffersonville to Crown Point to Fort Wayne to Middlebury. Let's keep municipal elections close, local, and separate. That's my position. You may not agree. It will save some money if we don't have to have elections those years. But I think I saw something in the tune of like $18 million. I don't have that note here in front of me. I actually left that out. But there was like a dollar amount that we said that we could save in Indiana. I don't think it's worth saving a little bit of that money to drown out local issues and to make them compete with presidential races. That's my position, and I'm sticking to it. Folks, thank you so much for listening today. It's so great to be back in the saddle. I am so excited for the week ahead. Thank you so much you are the reason why this show is growing, why it's working, why I'm having so much fun doing it. And I'm not doing this I'm not making any money. I've spent more money. I've made $0. I've spent money. I'm just having fun. And in a year or two, if it doesn't take off, I'm not looking to make money. I'm not looking to monetize. I feel like I got some things to say. I'm having a chance to say it. And I've got a couple people listening, and I greatly appreciate you. Again, like, share, 5 stars, subscribe. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Common sense conservatism, common sense daily life from a faith perspective. That's what this show is all about. And I'm so thankful you are along for the ride. Have a great